The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the producer and not necessarily those of WKTV Community Media.
Hello, everybody. This is Brandon Jose. Welcome to another episode of the Grand Rapids Ghost Hunters podcast. On today's episode, we'll be welcoming Erick Szilagyi of the uNcomfortable podcast.
But that is, I had some experiences when my dad passed away that, oddly enough, didn't start until about nine or 10 months after he died. I guess I was always under the impression that, some like a visitation from somebody that had passed or that you were close with, a relative, would kind of be an immediate thing. And I don't think that's necessarily always the case. I didn't have anything happen for quite a while. And then, like I said, about 9 or 10 months after that, I had some pretty significant stuff that just left me completely, I had no more questions. There were no questions anymore. Completely and totally convinced that people can reach out from beyond death. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I think that's in the right context. I think that's a a very special gift that person gets to have that interaction. And then, it was a few months, and then it was done. It was done. It was gone. Never have felt his presence, never have felt that anything weird that I've encountered since then has been related to him. It was a very, even though it was a couple of months long, that's a very short period of time. It was strange. It was very, very convincing and very eye-opening. So, we talked about, going out and doing investigations and stuff. And, I have friends of mine that are investigators, and, it seems like they're always out to prove something. They're always out to capture that one thing that somebody's going to, nobody's going to be able to deny when they see this video or this photo, and to me, it's like, if I go to do something like that, I go to experience it, not with the intent of trying to capture it and prove to a handful of people that, I had this experience, because I know I don't need to, I think you get that with people who have had a Sasquatch encounter. Those people, they know, and believe them or not, they don't care. They're not seeking anything anymore. They saw what they saw, and they know what they experienced. So
Yeah, that's like mine when I do investigating. Mine's for the experience, because the way I figure it is always you're never going to capture the evidence that's going to make everybody believe, because even if you had the greatest thing out there, they're going to go, oh, you're faked it, especially like with CGI and everything.
yeah.
Oh, you faked it, you're making it up, or you're mistaken it's something else. Like, most people are still going to deny it, even
Yeah.
just because it is so easy to fake, fake
Yeah,
evidence.
absolutely. It is. And it's getting worse, because now with the advent of all this AI stuff, Bigfoot is a passion of mine. I love stuff about Bigfoot. But now, like on Instagram or, all these different social media outlets, you see all these pictures of these really cool looking Bigfoot that, look like they were taken back during the time where photos were in that sepia color format. And, the one thing, and I don't understand why, but the one thing that AI doesn't get right very well are hands. And almost every time now when I'm looking at a picture, it's like, wow, that's pretty convincing. I always look to the hands. And if the hands look screwed up, I'm like, nope, that's AI. So far, I'm sure they're going to make advances in that, and it won't be so easy to recognize. But right now I'm like, nope, the hands are screwed up. I'm not buying it. But you asked me before we started recording about the orb that I saw. And I bring that up because in the photograph, I took a couple of photographs of my hand with the scratches on it from the jail. And I posted it on my Discord because I have an evidence channel in my Discord. And I was like, hey guys, just throwing this out here. This is where the circumstances, and this is the result of what my hand looks like. And in one of the photographs, there is a very small greenish blue teardrop shaped orb that's, looks like it's maybe a ½ inch away from my hand. Looks like maybe about the size of a sunflower seed, kind of elliptical. And the one thing I've noticed that with cell phone cameras, if there's any kind of a light source within view of the lenses of your camera or your phone, anything that's blue or green that shows up as an orb, you're going to pretty much be able to draw a complete perfect straight line from where the light source was to that orb. And it's definitely some kind of a reflection. So for me, orbs in photographs have always been a hard sell, because I've been places where I've taken pictures and it's quite obviously dust, light reflecting off of infrared cameras, on bugs, stuff like that. They don't look like bugs anymore because they got bright light bouncing off of them, because they got that shiny little powder on their wings and it looks like an orb, but it's not. So photographs of orbs, the people on Discord, I was like, hey, maybe, but to me personally, I'm like, it had to be something to do with the lighting in the place that I took the picture. And that's what led to it. But, when my kids were probably 13 and 14, Ghost Adventures was a weekly family night. We always sat and watched it. They had bugged me for weeks that they wanted to take some of their friends and go on a ghost hunt. And I was aware of a very old cemetery that was very near our house. And so we drove about 15 minutes. We got there. I had, I think, maybe 5 kids with me. We stood at the gates of the cemetery. I said, listen, this is the final resting place for some people. This is where, this is it. So if we go in here, you don't walk across the graves. You're respectful. You don't screw around. There's not a bunch of hooting and hollering, be respectful. And I have to say that all of them acted accordingly. I was very proud of them. My son, he took his cell phone, his Apple phone, opened up the voice notes and hit record and started walking around, using it as a digital recorder for trying to pick up EVPs. And I walked around. I had a camcorder, a Sony camcorder in one hand, and I had a Kodak digital 10x optical camera in the other. And I just walked around and I filmed and I took pictures. And everybody always says take 3 pictures, so everything I took a picture of, it was click, click, click. And we had made our way pretty much around the whole thing. Some really, really old gravestones in there from the really early 1800s. I was really surprised that they dated back that far. There was a house very nearby that was obviously the caretaker of the property. And my daughter walked up towards the front of the cemetery as you get closer to the road. And there were the whole cemetery was on 3 sides of it were outlined by tree line. And I don't know how far back the woods went or not. I took some pictures as I was walking through, and I actually got a picture that I don't know if you want to add these into I can send them to you if you want. It looks like a death mask. It literally looks like a theater mask, like Motley Crue's Theater of Pain album, it has the 2 masks. It literally looks like a mask like that in the woods where I took this picture. So that was kind of creepy. My son ended up getting an EVP that I didn't tell him about for years because it would have just freaked the hell out of him. And it sounded like a woman saying, "You don't belong here." Not in a scary way, not in a threatening way. When I listened to it, I got the impression it was like an old lady kind of, "You don't belong here," kind of shaking her finger at you. That's what my gut was. And I didn't tell him about that until he was 21, because that would have just freaked the hell out of him. And I'd taken another picture, a series of pictures there were two identical headstones. They were so old that everything was worn off, considerably worn off of it. The one looked like maybe the last two numbers of the date of death might have been like 17. So I don't know if that would have been 1817. I don't know. But one of the headstones was broken half, and the broken piece was leaning up against the other part that was still on the ground, and then the one beside it was still in one piece. And I took 3 pictures of it. And in the first picture, it's perfectly clear. In the middle picture, and then the picture on the end of it was the third one was perfectly clear. But in that middle picture, there is a mist that has a very definite shape to it. And the pixelation that it created in the picture itself was so weird compared to it. You could tell that the camera focused on the mist. In the first and the third picture, the camera pretty much just focused on everything, and the bushes and the trees behind it were relatively clear as far as the focus was concerned. But in the middle picture where that mist had appeared, it looked like the camera's focus tried to focus on the mist because everything behind it was blurred, kind of had that bokeh effect. That was uniquely weird, but it was summertime. It was hot during the day, cooled off in the evening. Maybe it was steam coming off of one of the gravestones. I mean, could have been anything. It looks weird though in the picture. I ended up tracing it with a digital pen, just drawing the outline of everything. And to me, it looks like somebody standing there, leaned over at the hip with their hands on their about down to their knees. I see what I think is like the cuff of a sleeve. It looks like the face has a mustache to it. I mean, again, I could be completely wrong, but it's pretty convincing to me. But my daughter had walked up to the front of the graveyard, and there were 2 really big old oak trees. And I was maybe 20 yards away from her, and she goes, Dad, come back here. It got cold back here. And I was like, yeah, sure it did, Rach. It got cold. So I walked back there, and I had the camcorder in one hand. I had the digital camera in the other. And I walked between those 2 trees to where she was. And I was like, oh shit, it did get considerably colder back here. It was much cooler, and it was dark out. So it wasn't like we walked out into the shade from the sunlight or anything. So I thought that was kind of strange. And there was about a 6-foot tall monument that looked very much like the Washington Monument. It had 4 sides, and then up at the top, it had like the pyramid sitting up at the top, and it was sitting on a base that was maybe a foot. The base looked like it was raw stone, and then the pillar was polished. And we're standing there talking about man, Rach, you're right, man. It's cold back here. And right in front of us, both her and I, this orb. And when I say orb, this thing manifested out of nowhere. And it produced its own light, because I could see the reflection of it in the polished part of the monument. And it maybe got to the size just a little bit smaller than a golf ball. It started from nothing, and it just kind of came right into view in front of us. And it was up near the top of the monument, not quite to the pyramid part of it. It popped up. It had a bluish hue to it, but like the light that it kind of, the glow to it, I would say would have been more white, but like the body of it had a bluish hue, and it just popped into existence, and it did this little ziggity zag thing, and then poof, it was gone. It wasn't like it took off. It wasn't like I could watch it and see it disappear off in the distance. It just poof, it was gone. And my daughter, who was like 12 at the time, and she's like, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And I looked down, and the record button was pushed. The camcorder was recording. And I put it on the computer when we got home, and sure enough, I caught it. Now it is on a hard drive that I have sitting over on my other desk here. That computer went blue screen a few years ago. I can't bring myself to throw away the hard drive, because I know at some point I'm gonna run into somebody who has better equipment or better senses than Geek Squad that'll be able to retrieve the information that's on there. But I got the video. I put it into Pinnacle. I think Pinnacle 10 at the time is the editing software I was using, and I slowed it down to I made a DVD with it, and I had it at regular speed. I slowed it down to 25% speed, 50% of regular speed, and then 75% of regular speed. And that whole thing, when you slowed it down to 75%, you see everything. I didn't even have to do like motion tracking to it or anything. It wasn't just bouncing all over the place. It happened in front of the camera, the way I was holding it. And it literally just comes out of nowhere. And as it starts to grow to about the size of that golf ball, you can see the reflection of it in the polished part of the monument. And then it does this little quick ziggity zag thing, and then poof, it was gone. And now to me, that's an orb. That is a true orb. What was it? I don't know. Was it somebody's was it somebody's spirit energy? Was it their, the essence of their soul? I don't know what the hell it was. But it wasn't there. Then it was there. Then it was gone. So for me, that is now the standard for an orb. Things in photographs, I'll give it consideration, and I'll take your word for it that you saw it when you took the picture. But that is, for me, that's the standard of what I would consider an orb.
Yeah, that would be for mine too. It's like you have to actually see it with your visible eye and be able to rule out. But I kind of wanted to hear some of my stories. So like on these, it actually happened over like 2 years, because we do like this Bigfoot training up in the UP with the Upper Peninsula Bigfoot and Sasquatch Research Organization. So the one we're inside of the campground, and like me and this other guy we're sitting back to back. And the first year, so I'm just sitting there, all of a sudden I keep seeing this white light off to the side of my head. I'm like, so that's why I go back to this other guy's. I'm like, "Okay, are you turning your flashlight on?" He's like, no, my flashlight's not on. He's like, "I haven't seen it." It's like all of a sudden, like the other guys from the Bigfoot team come up, walking up, and all of a sudden I see the light go like this, go in front of my face, and go like around them, and they saw it too. They're like, what was that? So that was one of them. And then like the next year we went out there, we're still in the same area, but we weren't in the campground. We were out. There's this other spot, and like this area is like 5 miles from like the nearest house, because it's like right on the border between like a state forest and a national wildlife reserve. So there's like nothing for like 5 miles from there.
And this is
So,
over
like,
the bridge. This is in the UP, right?
this is up, yeah, in the middle of the Upper Peninsula, yeah. So this other spot, we go down this trail, and we go up on this hill, because like they like to go up there because they would look down, because there's this big valley underneath. And that's where they like to go to look for Bigfoot, because you have that the high ground advantage up there.
Yeah.
So like as we're up there, all of a sudden we start seeing these bluish white lights off in the distance down back on the trail side. And we just see like a bunch of them. There's probably, I want to say about 10 of them or so back off in the distance. And all of a sudden, like they had like 2 of them started coming towards us. Like one of them was following because it was like a trail that kind of curves, and was following the trail up.
Yeah.
And the other one was coming up just off of the trail. But they would come up to like there's like on top of the hill, there's like a clearing, then there's like the woods. So like they would come up to like that tree line and stop. Like they had like the intelligence. One of them was like kind of like behind the tree, and seemed like it was kind of, poking its head out about 4 foot off the ground. Which unfortunately I had my camera rolling, but it was because it's so dark, there's not enough light
Right.
camera to pick it up, unfortunately. But those are the ones that we seen. There was like me and like 5 other people, and we were all seeing these. And we're like, they definitely have an intelligence to them, because it acts like, like 2 of them are like scouts almost.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's a really interesting aspect to the Bigfoot mythos. A lot of people throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to the woo aspects. But it's so prevalent in so many accounts that people are seeing these lights in the woods and stuff, and in association with either prior to or after having some sort of experience with these things. And it is such an interesting thing that, I wonder, there's some people that suspect that, maybe that's their form, at some point. And then they turn into the actual Sasquatch. Some people associate it with, possibly like some kind of a portal that these things are coming through. I love those kind of theories, and I entertain them, and it's a lot of fun to think about. But, until I see an actual portal develop in front of my face, portals are a really cool idea, but I don't know that's really a thing. I hope it is, but my logical mind tells me maybe not. But I have given consideration, so where I felt like I had been zapped. I think that was a vocal frequency, right? I think that was some people suspect that, Sasquatch, Bigfoot might have multiple sets of, at least 2 sets of vocal cords. Interesting theory. If that's the case, and if they have control over a wider range of frequencies with their vocal capabilities, people talk about them, cloaking or morphing, disguising themselves, making themselves invisible, turning around, taking 1 step, and then boom, they're gone. I spoke with a woman who had an experience where she had the experience as she was fleeing the area. When she looked back at the area that she was in, which she was very, very familiar with, spent a lot of time there, knew the place like the back of her hand. When she looked back to see if this thing was like in pursuit of her, she said that when she looked back, the entire landscape was not what it should have looked like. She said it looked completely different. Yes, the sky was still blue, the trees still brown, leaves were still on the ground, but it did not look right. And that kind of set me to thinking that if infrasound as a weapon, like they've used in the Cuban consulate a few years back, the Havana syndrome. One of the things that they claim as a side effect of what these people were experiencing, blurred vision, because of the frequency that they were getting hit with. And if these things have a vocal capability, because we know that they can create ungodly loud howls and whoops, and that, when people do get recordings of these things, they don't fall within the same frequency as a human voice. What if they have the capability of changing our visual perception because of the frequency that they can produce? Maybe they're not disappearing. Maybe they're not going into predator mode. Maybe they're just altering our ability to see them by a frequency that they're producing. I know that's far-fetched, but I mean, there's a lot of far-fetched things out there. This kind of has a little bit of merit, I think, in that we know already that they can produce frequencies beyond that of human capability. And, the other thing is, it's like when you get into paranormal experiences, you go into a haunted house, what do you get? A lot of times you get knocks, right? You hear knocks. When you're out Bigfooting, what's one of the most common things you hear? People talking about how they're hearing tree knocks. What if they're not a tree knock? What if when you're in your paranormal investigation, it's not a knock on the wall? What if that is one of the peripheral sounds that happens when that energy or that entity or that ghost or whatever you want to call it is entering our perception? What if that's an accompanying sound that's produced? We associate it with being a knock because it sounds like a knock, but what if that's just actually a sound that's being produced when they come into our perception? And I also think about that as far as the lights are concerned. Maybe that's a peripheral aspect of these unusual things coming into our perception. I don't know. It's strange. It really is. And those lights are reported in so many different Bigfoot experience. The thing that kind of annoys me about, I love Bigfoot as a topic. I do. But the thing that kind of annoys me is that when you have the people like Jeff Meldrum, Cliff Barrickman, some of the other guys that take this subject seriously and have done a lot for the subject matter over the last 20, 25 years. But they rely and lean on science so heavily that they absolutely will not entertain the woo aspects that are so commonly reported with these things, because they don't have any science to lean against. It's easy to talk about the foot morphology of a set. It's easy to talk about why the foot bends differently. It's easy to explain that the skeletal structure and the muscle structure of that foot would be so much different, even though it looks somewhat like our feet. It would be so much different because of the amount of weight that it's carrying, how it has to travel uneven terrain, stuff like that. You can lean against that scientifically. How are you going to lean against, lights that are arbitrarily showing up in the middle of the wood line? You can't lean against that. So they refuse to talk about it because they don't have any crutch to lean on. And even though I get that, I still think it's a disservice to the topic, because those are things that should be talked about because they come up so often. I don't think it's just people making it up, and if anything, it takes a subject that's already incredibly interesting and makes it even more interesting. But they won't entertain it. So, that's kind of a frustrating thing for me. I guess, to take it to an extreme, Stacey Brown Jr. out of Florida. His Bigfoot research has kind of taken a turn in the past couple of years, where he's starting to implement a lot of paranormal investigation techniques when he's out investigating for Bigfoot. You know, and he's had some pretty remarkable evidence that's come up. You know, are these things all from the same? I don't want to say from the same place, but you know, are all these things something that is common to just being outside of our perception on a regular basis? I mean, when people see a Bigfoot, are they in an area that, you know, let's say the veil is thinner, or, you know, there's something atmospheric there that's allowing them to see, this sounds ridiculous to say, but, you know, into a different dimension, or a different light value, or a different, you know, is there a frequency that they're being privy to just because of where they're at, or the conditions are just right and they can see? I don't know. It's super strange. You know, why are these things so hard to find? Well, one answer is because they don't exist. You know, the second answer is there are thousands and thousands of reports of these things. There are a ton of people who have nothing to gain by coming out and saying that they saw these things, yet they're willing to take the brash insults and the eye rolls and everybody in the town calling them crazy because they saw Bigfoot. and they just want to tell their story. They got to get it off their chest. You know, I tend to believe that. I think they do exist. I don't know what they are. You know, my scientific mind makes me want to say that there's something of this natural world. But when you start looking back into Native American, passed down Native American stories about them, they all say, all the tribes say that they, you know, they've got one foot in our world and one in the other. You know, those same Native Americans, they talked about the Star Children, you know. So all this stuff that we talk about, like on my show, Uncomfortable covers the umbrella of paranormal, you know, everything from somebody going through a spiritual awakening to, I've talked to demonologists. I talked to a reverend in the Church of Satan out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. I've talked to people who have experienced extraterrestrials, people that have seen UFOs. I mean, I cover everything. Nothing's off limits, within reason. You know, but there's so many consistencies when you start breaking down these people's experiences and the things that happen during that experience. So many of them correlate to other completely different types of experiences that it's like, I can't help but think that all of it is connected in a way. Not necessarily that they're all from the same place, but I certainly think that it's all connected in however that those things are coming into our perception. It's happening relatively the same way in each of those experiences. So.
Yeah, that's one of the things that always fascinates me. That's why I like to study. Like, when I started very much more into the paranormal investigating, you know, the ghost hunting side of it. But as it's gone on, I've always had more the interest of, well, this other stuff too. I want to explore this other stuff. And a lot of times I think there is some sort of interconnection, which I don't really know what what it is that kind of connects them. But there's definitely, it seems like there's areas where you have just a lot of weird stuff goes on, where it's like you get like a lot of UFO sightings, you know, cryptid sightings, ghost stories. Like, well, what's going on in this area? Why is all, you know, you have all these different things going on? And
yeah. Well, I don't know. You remember a show called Unsolved Mysteries?
Yeah.
Okay, so Netflix rebooted that show. And if you go to season 3, episode 2, I think it's called What Was in the Michigan Sky. It was about the UFO flap that happened over Lake Michigan, 1994, March of 1994. The weather radar up in Muskegon picked them up on their radar. And if you haven't seen it, that episode, they did a phenomenal job of covering that story. It was really well done. Bill Konkoleski, the Michigan MUFON state director, he's in it. The weatherman who was actually stationed there in Muskegon, he's a very large part of the show. And I actually had both of them on my show to discuss that, because one of my friends who I worked with up until about a year ago, when I first started doing this show, I said, "Hey, John, you ever have any screwed up stuff, that something that you can't explain?" And he's like, "Man, not really." He's like, "But there was one time when I was at Grand Mirror State Park, and Grand Mirror is right on the shore of Lake Michigan." I said, "Oh yeah, what happened there?" And he's like, "Well, we were out there and we were partying." He's like, we were partying. He's like, "But we saw these lights out over Lake Michigan." And he's like, "Man, they were like, they didn't move fast. They'd stop and then they'd start moving again." But he's like, and then all of a sudden they'd be gone in a blink of your eye, but then they'd be over here and you could still see them, but they were further away. And I'm like, "No kidding." And he's like, "Yeah, we were at the time back in when they were there, Grand Mirror was, you could stay there past whatever park closing time was." And he said the really weird thing was, he's like, once they took off and they were gone, we didn't see them anymore. He said it was like 2 or 3 minutes, and all of a sudden across from across the lake, like coming out of Chicago, he said you could just hear these planes coming. And he said it was definitely 2 military jets that came straight out of the west, headed east, and flew right over the state park where they were at. And I'm like they were in pursuit? And he's like, "I think so." And so he had told me about that well before I saw that episode. And so I watched the episode, and it was March of 94, March of 93 or 94. I forget which one. And I was like, "Holy crap, man, this sounds like really similar to what John told me." So I called John and I said, "Hey, you remember when you told me you saw those UFOs out over the lake?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "When was that?" And he's like, "Dude, I don't remember." He's like, "It was early 90s sometime." And he's like, "The only reason I can tell you that is because I knew who I was with and, the time frame of when I used to hang out with him." And I was like, "All right." And he's like, "The only thing I could tell you is I remember there was a huge plume of smoke that was coming like out of the south end of the lake." And I was like, big huge plume of smoke. And he's like, "Yeah, just this big black rolling plume of smoke that was coming out of the southern end of the lake." He's like, maybe towards like Gary or something. And I was like, that's weird. I don't remember anything about that. So I went online and I started looking. In 1994, there was a tire fire at a place in Gary, and that thing burned for months. They couldn't put it out. It just had black rolling smoke just rolling out of that thing for months. So I pinpointed it to, it was of 94, which March of 94 was when the thing in Muskegon happened. And that event took place. They first picked up on them in Muskegon, and it worked its way all the way down towards me as far south as Benton Harbor before it actually moved out farther out into the lake. And in that episode, they talk about the last place that they had pinpointed on the radar. They were over the only open area of water in March. So they were over open water. They weren't over frozen lake anymore. And he said at that point, those 3 lights, there were 3 objects that he was getting returns on the radar. He said at one point there was nearly 20 that had moved into that area and were like alternating, going up to higher altitudes, coming back down. And so I talked to Bill Konkoleski and I said, "Hey, is there any chance that this could have been an ongoing flap?" When, obviously this part of it started in March, but I said, I got a buddy of mine that puts them at Grand Mirror State Park during the summer. and saw the same identical thing that these guys are reporting. Now, in the episode, they said there were over 300 people that had called in this event in March throughout the coastal area between Muskegon and Benton Harbor. Bill actually said there were a number of continuing reports and sightings called in by people throughout the summer. So all that to say that, I think what we had going on was an ongoing flap. And for whatever reason, they were really, really interested in the waters of Lake Michigan.
Yeah, no, that's one of the reports. Some of the people were that they were seeing it actually sucking the water up.
Yeah, like a reverse water spout.
Yeah. So like we did an episode with it was Jack Bouchon was a meteorologist, and Bill. We did an episode as well, which I'll put that down in the links for our show and for your episode with them as well.
It was that was a lot of fun getting to talk to those guys. I've had a couple of interviews with Bill, and he's always just a great guy and always willing to give of his time to do these things. So
yeah.
But yeah, that's that's a small that's a fraction of some of the things that I've had happen in my life. And I mean, we could sit here for hours. And the thing, I guess the first time that I went into a lot of them was when I appeared on the Confessionals podcast. And I sat down and I wrote out each of the events that stood out to me that I remembered having happened throughout my life. And I can remember sitting there looking at that piece of paper, and it's like, if I sit there and talk about all this stuff, people are going to think I'm out of my freaking mind, that I'm just a whack job. But I mean, it spans, starting at around 5 till, I'm 57 now, almost 58. So, it's spread out. It's not like I have something weird happen on a daily or weekly basis. I've just had a number of things happen throughout the course of my life that have been strange, and it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder why, does everybody have a bunch of weird things that happen to them throughout their life and they're just closed off to it? And am I just open to it? I never had my parents never really tried to get me to stop engaging in this kind of stuff. They were like, that doesn't exist. Quit screwing around with that. It's not real. They never did that to me. So, I never had to hide my interest in these kind of topics. So, is that, does being heavily involved with a religion where you're told that these things don't exist and you're not supposed to mess with it. And, it's, like with the Catholic Church, trying to contact the dead is divination. Well, I talked to Archbishop Christina Rake out of the old Catholic Church in Chicago, Illinois. And she can cite several instances throughout the Bible, the old Catholic Bible, that, the book of the Bible is basically about ministering to the dead, and there's a lot of things that people point to that, you're supposed to continue to minister to the dead. And that's a way, to keep their spirit, active in your lives. There's so many different conflicting things when you start getting into religion about the afterlife and stuff like that. Is it because of indoctrination? And I'm not saying religion's bad, but if you're preached that enough, does that shut down? Does it make you less receptive to things happening in your everyday life that normally you would be like, wow, that was really weird, and I don't understand why that was, and to jumping to, oh, that must have been the wind, or, you know, the wind blew my windows open, so my keys flew off the table and landed on the floor because the wind pushed them off. You know, that doesn't make any sense to me. You know, now I don't know why my keys are on the floor, but I just watched them get blown off the table. You know, keys are pretty heavy. Wind through a window is not going to do that. You know, it makes me wonder, why have I stayed? And I'm a very logical minded person. I don't jump to everything as paranormal. I don't jump to every fart in the woods as Bigfoot. You know, I've spent enough time out there to know that there's a lot of things out there. But man, you know, sometimes a chair is just a chair, but sometimes it's different, you know, and I feel very fortunate that I've been able to go through my life and have those experiences. Some things have been scary, you know, some things have been like, man, I don't ever want to have that again. But for the most part, you know, and I talked about this with several people who go on paranormal investigations. You know, you turn on a TV show, Ghost Adventures in particular, where everything's a portal to hell. Everything is demonic. And, you know, I've got friends that have been in the paranormal investigative world for 25 years. And they'll tell you that it's like, I've never once been somewhere that I felt that was, you know, under siege by some kind of demonic force. You know, it's usually either something that's residual, or it's, you know, playful in a trickstery kind of way. Or it's just something that's trying to get your attention. You know, do I think that spirits are trapped here? I don't think so. I don't think that they've lost their way. I think they're here for, you know, like I told you, my dad, that whole thing. I don't know why it took 9 months, but it was here for a short period of time, and then it was gone. And I've never had anything that even remotely would make me think that it was him again. Maybe that's just the way it works. Maybe there's no rhyme or reason to it. You know, maybe he just wanted to make sure that I was okay. You know, my mom had moved out of the house. She had gotten another boyfriend. I was living in the home alone. Maybe he was just making sure I was okay. You know, maybe he had a delayed realization that something bad happened to him and he didn't know what the hell was going on. I don't know what it was, but it was very obviously him. And I don't know, it's just strange. You know, the frustrating part about this is, and I've enjoyed it a lot more since I've gotten past that whole trying to explain it, not to anybody else, but to myself, and just be able to kind of relish the fact that for whatever reason, I'm open enough to be able to experience these things, because it makes the world so much more interesting when you do get to experience those things. You know, I talked to some people who, you know, if it doesn't happen in the Bible, that's the only thing that they can. If it doesn't happen in the Bible, it's not true. And I'm like, oh my God, if you open your eyes and you were, you know, could privy yourself to the other things, your view of God would be so much bigger and so much more expanded. It's so much more infinite than what you're giving him credit for. You know, and I refer to God myself, I refer to as the creator, because I'm not convinced that, you know, the God that we're taught to believe in the Bible is necessarily the God. You know, I mean, there's so many religions throughout the world that have so many similar events, so many flood events, so many resurrection events, so many religions that talk about the spiritual ascension and you know, when you start getting back into the books that were before the Bible and that have been omitted from the Bible and stuff like that, and you read about, you know, who's referred to as Christ by a different name, Yeshua, you know, going over to India and studying those religions. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, I arrive at the same place as many of these people who are very religious, and that's that there is a creator, and that there is a universal spirit that I think we're all a part of, and that we'll all probably return to when our earthly bodies are done. I just, the books and all that, just, they don't do it for me. No disrespect intended to anyone. I have so many questions, and, you know, that whole thing, when you start asking questions and they tell you just got to believe, it's like, come on, man. Yeah. You just got to believe, you know? So, but I just think the world is so, you know, especially right now, the world is so screwed up. There are so many things to be worried about and so many things to be concerned about. You know, are we on the precipice of a world war? Is it going to be nuclear? You know, is there going to be another pandemic? Or, you know, are we going to be able to pay our bills? Are groceries going to go up even more? You know, how much higher can gas prices go? You know, how much higher can mortgage rates go? This is, you know, such a uniquely gratifying diversion, you know, when you get into this stuff and you start realizing the sheer number of strange things that are out there that we have no idea about, you know. And sometimes for a brief moment, it kind of gives you a little bit of relief in that you're not worried about what the hell they're going to say on tonight's, you know, world news. So I don't know. It's been a great trip. I wouldn't change any of it. I'm so fortunate to have been able to start this podcast and talk to, you know, hundreds of people that have had unusual experiences. And the thing I talk to all these people, and they have differing viewpoints. They have different religious views. It doesn't necessarily change my perspective. It doesn't change my beliefs. Sometimes it challenges them. It makes me think about them harder. But the thing that is wonderful about it, that it does do for me, is it gives me a chance to, when you pay attention to somebody who's got a different belief system or a wildly different perspective on stuff, that gives me a new tool in my bag, that I can look at something from somebody else's perspective. I can adopt that perspective that, you know, the guest from episode 97 had, and look at this perplexing thing that's in front of me and look at it from a different perspective and say, well, you know, maybe this is what they were talking about. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to change my belief or change my perspective, but it does let me see things in somebody else's light. And that, I think that's a wonderful thing about what I'm doing, to be able to have that ability. It's personally gratifying.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. That's one of the things I love about doing, you know, the Grand Rapids Ghost Hunters one, is because, like, I've had a lot of guests on that, you know, like, I don't agree with what, you know, their kind of worldview, but I can always find something I can learn from them. Mm-hmm. You know, that's why I like having and hearing other people's perspectives whose beliefs are different than mine, because you can still learn from them.
Sure.
Still have valuable stuff to learn.
You know, and I know this is not a topic that's very popular these days, but it's okay to disagree. And it doesn't mean you and I have to walk away hating each other because we see things differently. You know, we're so used to, you know, these polarizing attitudes and these differences. And I think a lot of it is, mostly politically driven. My God, man, if you're not a Republican, holy cow, or if you're not a Democrat, look out, I'm not going to talk to you. I can't stand you. Or, these people that are just berating people on Facebook because of, a specific belief. Man, let's go back to the old ways. It's okay to have a different perspective. It's okay to have differing views, and we can have a conversation about it, and it can be enlightening for both you and me. And we can still walk away and say, hey, let's go have a beer. It doesn't mean we have to think exactly the same. It does. I mean, how boring, could you imagine if everybody had the same viewpoint? If everybody believed exactly the same thing, you wouldn't have any reason to talk to anybody. Well, I already know what he thinks. I already know what she thinks. I know what she's going to say.
Yeah. The world would make no advancement either, because you need the people that are going to challenge. Because if you look at any great inventions or stuff like that, it started from a lot of them started from somebody like, oh, this is the way the world is. And they're like, no, I think we're going to give this a try.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of stuff started from, is just somebody seeing the world differently or being able to see something other people couldn't see.
Well, and it's the only way that things are proven. You have people that are making suggestions about something and they wind up being wrong. And then you have other people that are making suggestions and those things end up being proven right. And it's just like, I've got some friends that are Christian, and, when we talk about these kind of things, it's cool to see their perspective, because a lot of times it's very black and white. It's either of the good and the light, or it's of the dark and the bad. There is no in between. It's either of God or it's of the devil. To me, with what I've seen and what I've talked to about, there is, every day that goes by, that distance between total good and total bad, there's a lot of different things in between there.
Yeah.
And sometimes they kind of lean a little bit towards the bad, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. And sometimes they lean towards the good, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're good. There's a lot of things in between. And that, I think, is so much more interesting. So I may be completely wrong. I could be completely off my rocker. And if somebody can show me that and prove it, I'll be like, you know what? You're right. I'm nuts. But I don't think I am. I think there's just so much out there that
we've been on for 2 hours now, so that's giving me enough for 2 episodes. So
okay.
I'm going to wrap it up now because my phone battery here is getting low, but I definitely like to have you on again.
Oh,
or
sure.
if you ever want me on as a guest on your show too, I would love to do that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah. If you have any final thoughts or anything before we wrap up, or usually like to give a little, if there's anything that you wanted to cover or something.
Final thoughts, man. I guess, the one thing that I always try to impart to my listeners, and I think I do it through how I conduct my conversations. It's an interview show, but it's a conversation based, so I don't sit down with a pad of paper with my questions ahead of me. Excuse me. My questions come from the conversation. And I think that makes it a more honest conversation. And the thing that I just encourage people is have an open mind. That is something that is so lost on today's society. Have an open mind, use critical thought, and follow your gut. If it sounds like a duck and it looks like a duck, but it floats upside down, maybe it's not a duck, maybe it's something else. But yeah, critical thought and open-mindedness. And just, man, make an effort to be nice to people. You know, this, it's, if you catch somebody doing something good, man, shout them out, you know, just tell them, hey, I'm finding that with, you know, like going to fast food restaurants and stuff like that, man, you got some really angry, bitter people out there that are working for wages that are nothing. And when you catch somebody out there doing something that is like, holy crap, man, you're doing a great job, you know, go get your boss. I want to tell them what a good job you're doing. You know, I think that goes a long way. So, other than that, man, anybody who's watching, if you've heard me and I interest you at all, I encourage you to go to Uncomfortable Podcast. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Alexa, every one of the big podcatchers carries it. Easiest way to find me is just type in the search Uncomfortable Erick and it'll come up. And if you want to get a hold of me, contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. I'm interested in talking to anybody who's had some crazy experiences and wants to get off their chest. So
thanks, Erick, for joining us today.
Thanks, Brandon. I've had a ball. It's been great talking to you.
The opinions expressed in the preceding program are those of the producer and not necessarily those of WKTV Community Media.